So we are here at our Anger to Action event, interrupting microaggressions. So as we start allowing, we've got participants coming in now, and we're really excited to have our community come out in force for this particular program. I love the title, How to Be an Anti-Racist Co-Conspirator, right? That is exactly what we are all trying to do in this program. Is we're just trying to be better neighbors, better friends, better family members. And the only way we can do that is if we acknowledge our faults and acknowledge that sometimes we do have those faults. We have, let's see, we will go ahead and get started. I know that people are coming in now. It's just right at 7 o'clock, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself so that you can get to the most interesting thing. So I am Heidi Graham, and we welcome you to our program, Anger to Action, Speak Up, How to Be an Anti-Racist Co-Conspirator, Microaggressions. How do we deal with microaggressions? This is the hard thing. It's hard to do this with our friends, with our coworkers, with our family members. It's easy to do it online when you're behind Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, but it is very, very hard when you are in person with people that you love and respect. I feel really lucky that my children are quite willing to tell me when I'm being a jerk. So I am president of the local League of Women Voters. We cover Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, Buffalo Grove, Wheeling, Elk Grove Village, and Prospect Heights. Basically all of High School District 214. We are 100% volunteer organization. We do not have a single paid employee. And so we're nonpartisan, though we are a political organization. Our mission is to encourage the active and informed participation in government. Our membership is open to anyone, regardless of your gender, race, or ethnic group. And yes, women is in our name, but we're celebrating 100 years this year. We were founded in 1920. So we're an old organization, but we do welcome all gender and gender identities. I am really grateful to Katie Page, who helped shape this program. This program would not have happened tonight without Katie Page. And I'm also grateful to our panelists who are joining us, and we'll introduce those in a minute. But I'm going to hand this over now to Katie. So thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Heidi, and thanks for pulling this all together. I know it's a ton of work. So just quickly, the agenda for today. Oh, first of all, I'm Katie Page. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be starting tonight off and then eventually handing it off to our panelists to discuss some of these things that Heidi was just talking about at the beginning. So we will introduce our panel next, and then I will go through some definitions. We're going to talk about what is a microaggression. We're going to have lots and lots of examples. Then we're going to hear some personal stories from our panel. And then the most important part, talk about how to interrupt microaggressions and have those really hard conversations with family and friends and coworkers. So we're gonna go ahead and get going. Before we do that, tonight I want to make sure that you follow these community agreements here. These are not anything that I came up with. This is something that I've seen at many of the workshops that I've attended on equity, is to seek to understand, to be fully present, which I know is hard. All of us panelists were just joking a moment ago about how we're in our houses and stuff is happening and brownies are being made and dogs are barking and it's currently thundering outside my window. But as best you can to be fully present, and then get ready to sustain a little discomfort, because we can't grow if we're not a little uncomfortable. Status quo is easy. So we're gonna really try to get away from that today. So I am going to unshare my screen so that we can see our lovely panelists. And Heidi, if you want to introduce our panelists here. Oh, Heidi, you're muted.
So there's the technical issue. So we're really pleased with our panel. A couple of panelists have joined us again from our last program, Anger to Action, Being an Ally for Change. So Clyde Brooks is here with us. He is director of the Illinois Commission on Diversity and Human Relations. And frankly, none of this would have happened without Clyde, without his support, without his hand-holding. So I'm really, really grateful to Clyde, and I'm so glad that I can call Clyde a friend. So Ashlyn Gadsden, I may beam just a little. I have known her entire life. She is a rising senior at Prospect High School, as well as one of my neighbors, and her dad, Trevor Gadsden. So they are here with us, longtime residents of Arlington Heights. Genesis Davila, and I think I got that pretty correct. Okay. She is a recent graduate of Elk Grove High School, as well as the District 214 Newcomers Center. I encourage you to check out the Newcomers Center and what they do for our community. Really a wonderful program. And our league has spent the last couple of years partnering with the Newcomers Center and supporting them as best we can. Regina Gomez, she is a doctor at Northwest Community Hospital, one of the smartest people I know and most generous in spirit. She is a league member and has headed up our environmental panel, environmental interest group for the last 2 years. And then finally, as our moderators today, again, I'll gush maybe a little bit. I really love them. Catherine Odell and her sister, Madeline Odell. I've known Kat since she was 3 years old. She's a rising senior at Hersey High School, and her sister is a rising sophomore at Hersey High School. And her sister had, Madeline had a little bit of fame in the second grade when she got the state of Illinois to pass a law banning puppy mills, correct? I have that correct, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so she's pretty amazing. We do have an amazing panel. So we were hoping that Joe Podlasek, who's the CEO of Trickster Community Cultural Center, was going to be with us tonight. I do know that there was an event tonight at Trickster Community Center that may have kept him from us, but he is a wonderful community member. He is, and I will not pronounce this correctly, and I was hoping he was going to be here to help me pronounce it, the Lac Court Orillas Ojibwe tribe, LCO tribe. So he is a member of that tribe and also Polish. But if he comes on later as the panel, we will welcome him. So that said, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to show this phone number. And we, again, like Katie said at the beginning, we want you all to be present. And I've been on a Zoom literally every day of this pandemic, at least one. And I know that that chat is a distraction. And so we've turned it off. There is no chat. There will be no Q&A. In order to ask a panelist a question, what you will need to do is text this phone number that we have listed here. And we'll show it again at the end, but maybe go ahead and write it down, put it into your phones. And then
also, maybe they can put it, maybe they can broadcast it to the participants.
Can we do that? Yes.
I think we can broadcast.
Oh, I think that we've done that. We've got great technical people that aren't me helping with that. So there we go. All right.
Are we set?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in so that we can get to our panelists and hear what they have to say. Before we get going, I wanted to give a shout out to my colleague Joyce Kim, who helped put together all of these slides. Her and I provide professional development for staff at Prospect High School, and so a lot of the things you're going to see here today and the things we're going to talk about we put together for that purpose. So I just wanted to give her a little credit there too. So we're going to define a few terms, and I would like for you to go ahead and take a look at this cartoon. For those of you that can't see it real well, on the left-hand side it says prejudice. And the definition there is a preconceived opinion that is created by experience. And you can see there's a cop standing there, and the white guy's walking by and he's thinking good cop. The black guy's walking by, he's thinking bad cop. And on the right-hand side, it says discrimination. The definition is action based on prejudices. And so you can see there's a guy walking down the street. There's a supposed, the guy looks like he's homeless, sitting on the ground. He's holding up a cup, asking for money, and the guy yells, "Get a job." And so the guy gets up and he, answers an ad to get a job, and he comes in and he says, "I'm gay." And the guy says, "Get lost." And so discrimination is the action based on that prejudice. So too often people say racist when they mean prejudice. And these are very challenging times. So people are having hard conversations, and some people are getting offended. I know that firsthand from some of the conversations that I've tried to have. People that don't consider themselves racist certainly don't want to be called racist. So we need to be clear when we mean, what we mean when we have these very sensitive conversations. We should say the word prejudice when we mean prejudice. And we should say racism when we're talking about the systems that facilitate oppression. There are clear distinctions between the terms. So racism, like sexism and other forms of oppression, occurs when a racial group's prejudice is backed by legal authority and institutional control. It's a system. So an individual doesn't actually have the power to be racist. They can be prejudiced. They can be part of this system of systemic racism, but they don't have the power to be racist themselves. So of course, everybody uses that term the wrong way, including me, right? Everybody says the word, "Oh, that guy's racist," but really what we mean is prejudice. And so if we change our words just slightly when we're trying to have these really hard conversations with people in our lives, I think we might have a better chance of positive discussions and then change, ultimate change in the end, which is really what we're looking for. So we're asking you to engage in conversations about race and systemic racism, because the most anti-racist thing we can do is to have curious and honest conversations about how to dismantle these systems right here at home in Arlington Heights and the Northwest suburbs, because how can we dismantle it if we can't at least talk about it? So let's talk about microaggressions and what that means. You can see the definition at the top of your screen there. Usually they're brief. It's, everyday conversations between people, verbal, behavioral, environmental exchanges. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it is unintentional. I think oftentimes we think microaggressions are, we don't realize we've said it, and it's for sure unintentional. And it's when you send a disparaging message to individuals based on their group membership. And so, a poll just popped up. I'm gonna minimize mine just briefly, but you can certainly answer that as we go along. So a microaggression is something like, "You speak great English," assuming someone is foreign born, or "You're so articulate," believing people of color are less intelligent. Or "I'm not racist, I have Black friends," denial of any individual racisms. And "I don't see color. I don't want to acknowledge race." By the way, I have my notes off to the right here, so I'm not like looking off at something else, just so that you know, I'm looking at my notes. So I wanted to just speak to this "I don't see color," because having grown up in the 70s and 80s, that was a very common thing. And again, the intention was to mean, I'm not racist and I'm inclusive of all people. I know I've used that phrase long ago in my life. I know actually I've heard it as recent as this week. I've heard somebody say that. And I understand now saying that "I don't see color" is just false. I am not blind. I can see color. I'm not colorblind either. Obviously, I can see what color people are when they come up to me. So the goal is to recognize, control, and then regulate your innate impulse to make decisions based on the characteristics of somebody. So saying I don't see color just dismisses all of that. So we for sure want to see color. We want to see color. We want to acknowledge color. And what's hard about microaggressions is that so much of it is unintentionally hurtful, but intent is not impact. Here are some more examples. I'd like for you to take a look. Where are you from? No, where are you really from? You don't act like a Black person. Your name is too hard. I'll just call you Mary. And teachers, I'm looking at you, and really, I'm looking at me. Even if you haven't ever said that, accepting a student doing that for you, in my opinion, after my training now, is just as bad. We want to make sure that we're calling students by the name they want to be called. Are you the new diversity hire? It happens. I have actual stories I could tell you. He's gay, but he's like the best worker in the department. Why haven't you found a husband yet? You're pretty good looking. Given what your husband does, do you really even have to work? Why are you being so shrill? So who's the man in the relationship talking to someone who's LGBTQ? And then the same, you don't dress gay. So thinking about this, it's time for a little bit of homework. Those of you at home, I would like for you to, get out a pen and maybe jot this down, notes app on your phone, or just use your memory if you're not old like me. And I want you to think of some microaggressions directed at you in your life for your race, for your gender, for your sexual orientation, for your age, if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're divorced, married, single. Think of a few, maybe jot it down, maybe talk about it with somebody when this is over and how that made you feel. Or if you have somebody sitting in the room with you, you can talk about that now. So think about that for a second. Our panel too, because we're going to ask you to talk about those in a minute. And then now I want to think about, have you ever said any of these types of things that you're seeing on the screen, any of the things that I just read? So now is really the time to sustain discomfort, look inward, and really be honest with yourself. When you see someone of color, a Black person, someone who's Mexican, someone who's Asian, anyone who's different than you really, are you having these preconceived notions and thinking any of these types of things? So now is the time to think about that. And I might not have said some of these things out loud, but if I'm being honest, I know that I have thought some of these things for sure in my life. So it's time to sustain discomfort. And then go ahead and take this little microaggression poll. Have you ever been subjected to a microaggression? Have you ever perpetrated a microaggression? Have you ever confronted a microaggression? So if you could answer that, that would be amazing. Thank you. We are going to give you the tools at the end, of course, to interrupt microaggressions, but we want to hear from our panel. So panel, get ready. We're going to come to you. I'll hand it over maybe to our moderators, Kat and Maddie. Does that sound good, Heidi? Or
Yes.
Fantastic.
So we want to know what sort of, if any, microaggressions you have experienced and if you're comfortable with sharing them. So far, we haven't gotten any messages on the phone number. So is there anyone who wants to start?
Okay, I'll go ahead and lead off. So there are a number of them. And so the one that I will use for this story is, this is actually when I was a lot younger, right? I'm not going to say how much younger, but I was at a party and somebody changed the music that was playing over the stereo system to a rap song. And by the way, it wasn't a very good one. They changed the music back to what was originally playing, and then the host came up to me to apologize for for changing the music. And the fact that they were trying to set a different type of vibe for the party, the only problem was I wasn't the one that had changed the music in the first place. One, because I'm not that kind of person, right? I'm not going to go to somebody's house and just change their music at a stereo system at a party or whatever it is. But, you know, it was no coincidence that I was the only person of color that was at the party at that time. So that's the one I'll use for today.
Yeah, and then I guess a more recent example, and I think a pretty relatable one for a lot of people of color who are going to college and universities, especially high-level universities. I had a friend of mine tell me that it was going to be easier for me to get into college because of affirmative action, which is not true. That's not the purpose of affirmative action, which I don't know if everyone knows what that is, but it's basically, it's a way that to make sure more minority students have the opportunity to go to college that might not otherwise have this opportunity. And it doesn't mean that it's like easier to get into college because you're minority. It just tries to even the playing field more. So that's just obviously hurtful because I work really hard in school and it's really important to me. And like being told that it doesn't matter, that you're just going to get in because you're Black, is really offensive and hurtful.
Definitely. Would anyone else like to share their experience with microaggressions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know of a Black person who hasn't had such experiences. And I always like to raise the question, what is there in people that feel that they have to create pain? What's driving them to say and act in such a way? I could spend the next hour giving you examples, but let me give you an example of current events. Aunt Jemima pancake syrup. Can all of you see the picture of Aunt Jemima on that bottle of syrup? The bandana around her head. Every time I see that, my mind goes to Gone with the Wind. Hattie McDaniels playing the role, looking almost like that lady on Jemima Pancake. Domesticated. It's an offspring of blackface, you know, that was very common in the United States. And then every time I see a bag of rice called Uncle Ben's rice, my mind goes to Gone with the Wind. It's these identities that people have of other people that cause them to legitimatize their microaggressions. I mean, all of the examples that were on the screen a few minutes ago, I've experienced. We've heard them with names given to our president or the former president, Obama. We've heard them in terms of Mexicans go back to Mexico, Blacks go back to Africa. So as we look at microaggressions, yeah, I think it's important for us who have suffered or experienced the pain, whether that pain was inflicted on purpose or not on purpose, it's still painful. And most Blacks can see through it. We can debate whether it's implicit bias or whether it's elevated to microaggression. To me as a Black, it really doesn't matter because it's in the mind. And what's in the mind comes out through action and through one's mouth. So a few others, the failure to listen. There's a very common one where you're interrupted. Your thought is interrupted as if you don't know what you're talking about, staring at me like I'm out of place. I'm in a parking lot and a white lady parks next, or I drive up next to her, she's parked, and she locks her doors. You know, those are all messages. They don't trust me. They haven't said a word, but the action of locking that lock. You can say, well, maybe she would have done it if the guy was white. I don't know, but that's how I felt. And so, yeah, the ones that have been mentioned, you're so articulate, you're not like those others, you speak well. Is that your hair? Which is very common with Black women ask. But I think we also need to ask those folks who inflict that pain, that carelessness, where did it come from? It's like the study of racism. We just study racism. And I'll say to my white brother and sister, according to the Kerner report, you created it. Why you got to study your creation? If you created it, you ought to know how to tear it down. If you are inflicting pain, I can't tell you why you do it. Why do you do it? Why is it necessary for you to make me feel the way I feel? Now, let me say this in closing. When people continue to say things and act a certain way, because that's their identity, that's the way they were taught, they saw a film. The schools have been notorious. The schools and the church are the major institutions behind this creation of division. And that's where some change needs to take place. How are certain people pictured? I have 30 hours short of my PhD. For all of my elementary, I have never seen an image of a Black dentist, a Black doctor, a Black teacher, a Black pilot, until I got into high school. And they were rare. So if people have an identity, an image of me, you know, looking like little Black Sambo, and they grow up with that, then their language and their actions follow that identity. So in closing, I think this is tremendous. I hope that we all will register for the League's training program on unbiased training that is coming up, because that's very important to understand. So we need people to look inward. Now, when I correct someone using microaggressions, sometimes I've been accused of playing the race card. Oh, you're so sensitive. Why are you so angry? And that's why white people have to move on this, become educated, and correct other white people. Because when I do it, boy, he's angry. He's anti-white. Oh, he's just, you can't even talk to him because it's so institutionalized, they don't even know what they're saying. They don't know what they're doing because it's so natural to them and they don't see it. I'm done.
Thank you. Would any other panelists like to talk about a microaggression they've experienced?
I can go ahead. You can hear me? So my parents, okay, thanks. So my parents were actually born in the Philippines and immigrated here in 1968. My mother, who's now retired, has been retired, she was an intensive care unit nurse. My father actually was an English teacher. And I was born in Evanston, Illinois. So in 2002, I had just been recruited from Arizona, where I was living at the time, and working for the Indian Health Service to actually join a new hospital practice at Northwest Community. And so shortly after starting, I had decided to go get some coffee in the hospital doctor's lounge. And a medical staff office employee made sure to tell me that that coffee was only for doctors. She had mistaken me for housekeeping. If back then we weren't color coded with our scrubs. So all I know is that I was about 33 years old at the time. I was female and I was of Filipino descent. And I told her I was a physician. So that was a long time ago, about 18 years ago. And really what sticks out to me now, after I was asked to be a panelist, was being told that the coffee wasn't for me, being shocked with, I guess, her thinking that I would have the audacity to come into a doctor's lounge and go get coffee, that I didn't belong in the doctor's lounge, and mostly that an apology after telling her that I was a physician wasn't offered. And it's interesting because I think all the current events have prompted some conversations, and actually shared that experience with one of my colleagues who happens to be a white male from Long Grove of the Jewish faith. And, you know, we've talked to each other about our faith, trying to learn more from each other. So when I told him that story, he asked me, do I think it was because I was female or Filipina that she thought that? And I said, Joel, that's a really interesting question. I don't know. And the other story I'd like to relate is, again, early on in that same doctor's lounge, and you're probably wondering, why does she keep going to that doctor's lounge? I had sat down with a group of male physicians that I had not met. You know, I was new and trying to get to know the physician community. And for some reason, that conversation had centered around conflicts abroad. And one of the older male physicians made the assumption that I was Vietnamese. I mean, specifically Vietnamese, not even just Asian. As he was relating his story, he referred to your people, and I told him I was not Vietnamese. And as far as the list of the microaggressions that was shown earlier, I've heard everything from I can't understand you with your accent, you know, where are you from? I'm American. No, where are you really from? So that's what I'd like to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share?
Sure, I'll go. So when I was a junior in high school, I was in a U.S. history class where this class was for ELO students. So for students who were still learning English. Can you guys hear me? My God, okay. So my teacher came one day and she told us that we had to make an essay and write about our immigrant story, assuming that we are all immigrants, assuming that we are all not from here. I'm Puerto Rican, so I am from here. But just because I speak Spanish, this person assumed that I just wasn't from here. So in my essay, I wrote about my migrant story because I migrated to Illinois when I was a freshman in high school. So my other story is one day I was going to school and I took a taxi to go to school. This was senior year, second semester. And my taxi driver was just trying to make conversation, and he asked me he was just asking me questions about Puerto Rico and how did Puerto Rico became part of the United States, and just basically the story which I know enough of. So we were talking about that, and at some point he said, oh, so you're not like really an American? And I'm like, yes, I am an American. And he's like, no, but Puerto Rico isn't like really a state. It's just a colony. And I was like, yeah, but I am still American. I speak Spanish. We were colonized, and I'm American. I'm still an American. So yeah, so those are my two stories.
Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else that I missed? Do we miss? Is this everyone? All the panelists?
Yeah.
Have you started getting questions?
Yes, we have.
Okay, so I'll repeat the number just one more time. So if you want to send a question in, it is 224-300-6157. Again, 224-300-6157. Thank you.
In. So our first one is from a person who said, I have asked where someone is from before, and I feel like I was showing interest in their culture and heritage. Is it wrong to want to know about other people's culture and heritage? How do you feel about people asking where you're from in that sense?
It's based on an assumption that the person does not belong where they're at. Where are you from? Well, if I meet you in the grocery store in shopping, what would lead one to think that I don't live in the area? So the assumption is that they do not live in the area. That's the way I would take it or give an answer to that. Because it has to be an assumption for people to make the statement that they make. And that assumption is based on false information. It may be because they've never met a Hispanic, they've never met a Black, or whatever it may be. And so they just make assumptions like all Blacks live, they never have been around a Black, so they assume all Blacks live on the South Side. You know, because if I live in an all-white community and I see a Black at Jewel Food Store, and I say, do you live in the community or where are you from? The assumption is that they're not there. It's a false assumption that they would not make with a white person shopping at Jewel Food Store. So therefore they see the person's race or culture or something that makes them want to ask that question.
I want to answer that too. So the way I feel about it, and I was actually thinking about this the other day, is that I feel like instead of asking where you're from, because I sometimes just have that question because I want to know, because I'm Puerto Rican, and if you're Mexican, I want to just talk about where you're from and how were things over there if you ever lived there. So I think another way to say it, you can say like, what's your ethnicity? Because not necessarily you were born in another place, maybe you were born here, and what's your experience here, maybe. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it, but I don't.
It's about reframing, right? About reframing the question.
Mm-hmm. And I would say one important thing that Hennis has said is that I'm assuming you're talking about somebody maybe that you're spending some time with and you're wanting to get to know them more. And so I would say relationship and tone. If it's a stranger, why do you care? Like Clyde said, there's a big assumption there. If you're asking somebody that question and you don't even know them, why does that matter to you? So Clyde hit the nail on the head. And then what Hennis has said, you know, if you just want to know more about somebody that you're getting to know, somebody at work, if you have a relationship with somebody, that's a completely different thing. It's all about relationship and tone. If it's a stranger, would you ask a white person that question? Then why are you asking somebody else that? Why do you care?
And that where you're from can also be just like trying to see if this person is legal or not, because I have had that question asked to me. when I was a freshman, and they would ask me like, "Oh, where you from?" And I'm like, I'm from Puerto Rico, and they're like, "Oh, so how did you get here?" And I'm like, "I took a plane, and I got here." What was I going to get here? So yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment, or can we move on to another question? You all good? Okay. So our next question is asking, how do you call in a microaggression when the microaggressor has a lot more power and influence from you? This person was saying that the mayor of the city they live in was the microaggressor, but the person felt powerless to call him out and still does. So what do you do?
Well,
So I'll take a crack at it. And what I would say is, you know, there's always that opportunity or that need to determine when to pick your battles, right? And in some situations, you are simply going to have to, because of whatever the case may be, whether it's because the person in a position of power or it's just not really a great place to have that conversation for whatever the reason may be. And those reasons may be personal, they may be external, they may be internal as well, where you may have to walk away. And so that becomes part of the magic in dealing with these microaggressions, particularly when we're talking about microaggressions of race, which is where this topic is going from as well. You've got to make that choice on an individual case basis. So, and there's no shame in being of the understanding that you have to maybe swallow it this time and walk away. Not every fight is worth winning.
Anyone else?
I do think that that's where groups like League of Women Voters comes in. That when you feel like, especially if it's an elected official, that's why you have a relationship with, you know, as League, we have relationships with all of those people. And I promise you, it's a little different when I make that call and I call out that person on, say, that microaggression, or maybe my vice president or one of my other board members does that. And so, you know, let us know. That's one of the things that I feel like League is pretty good at. We're good at being advocates and teaching people how to be advocates. I don't really shy away from a fight, so.
So Heidi, thanks for that. And that's really a great thing to take away from this whole conversation, is that while the topic is learning how to do microaggressions, that may be the fact of understanding that there are allies and resources that are out there to help with that, right? Whether it's being able to help in the moment with giving you the skills and the tool set to handle it, or after the fact, the League of Women Voters or some other agency that's able to make sure that whatever the issue is has an opportunity to be addressed.
I do think that that question brings up an interesting point as far as discrepancies in power, because this happens in healthcare, you know, with physicians or nurses, and there should be somebody, I would say, I'll speak for healthcare. The responsibility lies on the person that has the power to act appropriately. And when that doesn't happen, I do think that there should be other methods to express what has happened to somebody else who hopefully is an ally within that same system.
Yeah, and I would add in too, at school, for the students out there, there are allies in every building. You can go to your administration, you can go to your teachers, and you should be reaching out if those microaggressions are happening in school.
I think it also depends on who the person is. Are they in a position of power? And who I am, for example, as a minister, I'm supposed to be a change agent for change, because simply to go along, which has been the pattern, nothing will ever change. So the need to get other people involved, and if necessary, surface the issue. Can't win every war, and every war should not be fought. But I think we have to, as the gentleman mentioned, Mr. Gadsden, we have to pick our battles. But if you're talking about a mayor or a village board or a village manager or the head of a corporation, someone who has power, you're not going to change it with a toothpick. It takes mobilization of the good to bring about the necessary change to discontinue the microaggressions or whatever it may be.
Our next
being an agent, a change agent.
Our next question is how to initiate authentic discussion about the Black experience to our parish of mostly white people.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, yes, sorry. How do we initiate authentic discussion about the Black experience to our parish of mostly white people?
Well,
all eyes are on you, Clyde.
there is a pamphlet that I could provide to the league. If they choose to distribute, there's an article that suggests it's a waste of time to continue to talk to white people about racism. And it got wide circulation. And that is why some of us feel that people like myself need to say less. And the challenge is to get white people to speak up. Because when I speak up, my skin color precedes the message, which a white person doesn't have to experience. And a good example is the Black Lives Matter. When young white men and women began to use that term in Arlington Heights and throughout the Northwest area, riding around in convertibles with signs, it became legitimate. When blacks were doing it, we were mocked. When Colin Kaepernick, who lost his career in football because he kneeled, but when young whites started kneeling, it took on respect and credibility. As I told a group of young white men and women, you have the power to bring about change. So what we have to do is to encourage others to get involved and to speak up. And this is what's happening now. People are speaking up. Change is occurring. And that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I was actually thinking about this question prior to this event. And I think what's key for us to learn about each other is to actually take the time to educate ourselves. If you want to know about Black Lives Matter, you probably have to go and try to educate yourself about a little bit of history. If you want to know about Vietnamese, you probably have to learn about that. If you know what I'm saying? It's like we're not going to learn it just in a casual conversation, and it takes effort to know about different people and their history and you know, how they're present in this country. So I think that education that we take upon ourselves is really important, and that creates the framework for good conversation if you want to learn about something.
Thank you. Are we ready to move on to the next question? So what is the best way to respond to a microaggression without sounding aggressive ourselves?
Well, we're going to cover that shortly. Should we dive into that now and just go through some of those maybe, and then we can come back? Heidi, does that sound okay for the panel? Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so how we need to do this is we all need to use our voices, right? It's hard to speak up, but now more than ever, like Clyde just said, and especially as white people, we need to use our voices. We have the social capital to make change for Black people and for people of color in this country. Heidi, do you want to talk about your mom for a second?
So I love my mom, but she is 83 and she is from the deep South. And again, I love my mom. She's really amazing. But we were talking, she saw a picture of my daughter's freshman roommate, who's now her best friend, they're besties. And my mom said, is she, and we were in person, and she said, is she Indian with a dot or Indian with a feather? And you almost don't know what to say to that. But what I did say was, well, I don't think it has anything to do with anything. She's an American from Dallas, Texas, you know, and we've done it a couple of times with my mom, and it's super uncomfortable. And she has gotten a little defensive, and she is a very warm-hearted and generous person. But what I know about my mom is that in the end, she does really want to be a better person. And so telling her that what she has said is hurtful that's what she wants. She wants to know that she's hurt someone. And so that's what I tell people. That's the kind of person I want to be. I want to be the person that can hear that. And it's uncomfortable when you hear it. Trust me, my kids do it all the time. But so that's my story.
Thank you, Heidi. Yes, so what can we do? There are lots of ways to engage, and I would agree, Heidi, it's hard. White people, it's hard. You got to open your mouth, but the more you do it, trust me, the easier it gets. You can find all kinds of stuff online, but we're going to give you some examples here. So for example, there's a microaggression. It's either coming at you, more likely than not, you have just heard somebody say something, and you want to describe what you noticed and engage. I'm noticing, I'm feeling that wasn't well received. Anyone else? You know, oh, I noticed how quiet everyone just got. You know, what just happened here? Or if you're the person who said something, wow, you seem to have a reaction to what I just said, you know, maybe being a little self-aware. Ask about it. If you're hearing somebody else say something, can you say more about that? And really make them explain themselves. You know, can you give me an example? Help me understand what you meant by that. You can interrupt. Let's slow down and talk about what happened, or let's take a breath. You can relate, you can share. It's always good to do that with somebody, like, oh, you know, I can relate to what you said, however, or I remember when I thought that way or said that thing. And really that's, you know, we need to see a different direction. So speaking up to family and coworkers and people in your life can be really hard. And some of these things that I've gotten are from this lovely website called tolerance.org. And you can see there's all sorts of resources here for educators and really just for anyone. And it's fantastic. You can see there's a whole tab on speaking up, and it tells you how to talk to your family, how to talk to your friends and neighbors, school, work, public. They've got 6 steps on what to do. And so this link is, I think, being shared with you currently, and also in the follow-up email it's there. But as you scroll down, you can see, you know, it talks about children, it talks about being prepared and enrollment, you know, your joking in-laws. the father-in-law routinely tells a racist joke at family gatherings, you know, and it tells you what to do. And it tells you actual words here that you can say. You know I can't control what you do in your own house, but your jokes are offensive to me. Just saying it out loud. And sometimes those are the hardest conversations to have. Go back to this real quick. Oops, sorry. There we go. So another thing with family is you want to appeal to your shared values. So our family is too important to tear apart, to let bigotry tear it apart, or our family has always stood for fairness. And the comments you're making are terribly unfair. Or just simply, is this what our family stands for? Just throwing it out there and letting the people in your family describe what they're saying. Sometimes it's hard, you know, with the power structures. Like, is there a relative that you always let get away with it because they're 84, you know? Maybe that's a good place to start. So what if it's me? What if I'm the one who does the microaggression? And I forget what was it, Regina? Somebody said that, you know, there was no sorry waiting for her at the end when the person said, this coffee isn't for you. Well, that's where you can start to change. If you do step in it, and it's gonna happen, and we do it all the time, and the more aware you become, you're gonna realize how much you do it as a white person, stopping yourself. So you wanna take responsibility. What an insensitive thing for me to say, and just say you're sorry. That is the first step. And there are some other things that tolerance.org suggests. They say you can write a letter. Like, let's say it's after the fact. Maybe you went home and realized, wow, what did I just say, or what did I do? You could certainly email somebody or text them and just, I'm so sorry for the tasteless and inappropriate joke that I told, or, you know, please accept my humble belated apology. I'm trying to be a better human. Don't do it again. With emails, you can stop forwarding them. You don't have to forward an email just because someone gave it to you. And as a matter of fact, the anti-racist thing to do would be to reply to the sender and tell them that it was offensive, and, you know, and stop that whole thing. I think Heidi, in planning for this program, she had another little small, I don't know why we keep throwing poor Heidi under the bus. I probably have 50 stories, but Heidi, you've got one that you said you wanted to share today.
So, you know, I'm planning for this webinar, and I'm really proud of the work that our league is doing and being willing to, again, we're 100% volunteer. And I mean, these webinars are not cheap to put on, and our board approved the money for it. So I was really proud of it. Then I was really proud of the panel that we had going, and I was talking to somebody, and the kids were in the car, and I was like, oh yeah, so we've got, you know, somebody who's Latina, somebody who's Korean American, and someone who's American Indian. And as soon as I got off the phone, my kids were like, are you kidding me, Mom? That's not right. And I did it a second time describing the panelists. I used the term American Indian instead of the preferred Indigenous person. And so, of course, I apologized. I, you know, thanked my children for pointing it out, and hopefully will not do it again.
And I think at this time, if our panelists want to kind of chime in on some of the things we talked about interrupting microaggressions before we wrap this up for the night, now would be the time. Any other remaining thoughts you have, or something that came up when we were looking at some of those ideas?
I might.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Well, go ahead, Clyde.
You go ahead. I'll follow you.
Okay, I'll go. So thanks, Katie. And I wanted to kind of piggyback on that thought of, and you mentioned it, it is difficult to interrupt those microaggressions and confront them when they happen. It is also difficult when you are called on those microaggressions that you commit. And so I really want to make sure that the emphasis should be on understanding that and saying, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry is different than I'm sorry, but this, or I'm sorry, but that's how I've always referred to those people, or anything to that extent, right? It's, you have to own the apology, you have to own the behavior and live up to it, and to simply say, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was offensive, I'll never do it again.
I like to raise another look at microaggression, and I call it institutional microaggression, carried out by way of exclusion. Every taxing body, nearly in the area in which you and I live, is involved in microaggression by way of exclusion. Police departments, library, schools, municipal government is staring us right down on our face. But more of us have got to see that kind of microaggression. Because it's occurring in our own backyard. I hope one day, I'm not optimistic that we can remove hate and bigotry. Those words have no respect just for skin color. White families having microaggression, you know, it affects almost everybody. But the one that is a change agent that I'm deeply concerned with, and I know the league is, and I know others, are those intended or otherwise actions of institutions that we are empowered to change via elections, via getting our pastors, faith leaders on board who are notoriously silent. And so I just want to present that as an idea as we talk about microaggression, so that we're all moving in the same direction. I'm like you, I hope people can change, but I don't know if we can change people who are 50, 60 years old about their feelings about Indians or Muslims or women or whatever, you know, because it's so institutionalized. But as Dr. King said so often, much of this is dying, and I see it, is just how expensive some are going to make the funeral. So I think the kind of things that the league is doing, these kinds of discussions, should be a launching pad for us to come together and address the serious institutional microaggression that's occurring in our own backyard. And we can do something about that. Did I talk too much? Well,
Never.
No, yeah, right. But I will say, you know, I might be in one of those groups, whether it's in the 50s or 60s or whatever it is, but I do feel like we all still have the capacity to learn and grow every day. And so the excuse of, well, my grandmother's 84 or whatever it is, that shouldn't fly. That shouldn't be allowed to fly anymore, right? These are challenging times. They call for people to be challenged, and it calls for challenging people. And this is the opportunity that we have in front of us.
I agree. It's just I like to have some heaven while I'm here on earth and alive. And I have to always wait for others to get educated and want to change before I can enjoy some heaven right here on earth. And so this institutional thing affects my life. It affects the life of African Americans and many others, white as well. So I'm just saying that yeah, I don't mean to sound so pessimistic by suggesting that.
No, I didn't mean to discount anything
I know.
that they're previous.
I just think It's staring us. We talk about racism like in Mississippi or LA, but it's staring us right here in the face, and we got to act on it. It's kind of OJT. You know, we can fight microaggression where it really exists, where it's really doing the harm. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
Do we have any other questions for the panels? One of the things while they're looking, I just want to kind of bring up back to something that Katie had said at the top of the program, and that was that we're definitely making a distinction that it is the institution that is racist, correct? And the person is prejudiced or biased. And I think that this is an important distinction. Words matter. So in the work that we do with League, one in particular that I hone in on all the time is gun violence prevention. You will never hear the words gun control come out of my mouth when talking about that issue. And the reason is I have a father who went to West Point, 24 years in the military, about as conservative as a man comes. If I were to address my dad and say, oh, I think we need more gun control, that's the end of the conversation. He will not listen to me. I cannot listen to him. It's over. But the minute I say to my dad, what kind of gun violence prevention do you think we should have? All of a sudden, the conversation opens up, which is why when I see people who are behaving badly, I personally feel the need to hold back and make sure that I use the term prejudice or bias so that I don't shut them down and that I can continue the conversation. Regina taught me very well. She said, you know what? Those environmentalists or environmental naysayers, you are not going to change their mind. What you have to do is get the recyclers, they're willing to recycle. You have to turn those people into environmental activists. So we have to turn those people who believe that racism is a problem, they believe prejudice is a problem, we have to turn them into the activists. Those people who have their mind shut, I think Clyde's right, you're not going to change their mind. So focus on those friends, and there are a lot of them out there.
Yes.
Which is why we want to continue having programs like this for the community, because it isn't a one and done. Okay.
Yeah, I call it low-hanging fruit, Heidi. You're exactly right. You need to get the low-hanging fruit. The people that are listening, the people that are ready to become co-conspirators and allies. Did anyone else on our panel have anything else to share? We're getting close to just showing the last few things that we're going to charge people to do.
Were there any other great questions, girls, that you thought we should ask?
There was one question circling back to our conversation about tolerance and going back to how, like, the words we use to describe issues. A person was wondering, just commenting on how the word tolerance makes it seem like the group or the people you're talking about is intolerable. Like, just talking about, does that offend people when you're trying to put forth acceptance to other people if you're just tolerating a person? How do people on the panel feel about that language?
Toleration to me has never been a positive word. For example, we've heard we're a more tolerant community. That is not a plus. It's like saying we're more willing to tolerate the bad smell of our community. I want to be valued. I want to be appreciated, not tolerated. So that word is used constantly. I don't see it as a plus. I see it as a negative. It's like one of those, hey, Mike, maybe implicit bias kind of words. People use it, they don't mean any harm. That's why the recipient looks at microaggressions, etc., much different than good people who do not mean any harm, but say it because they don't feel the pain of the words that they use or the actions they take. And I think once people feel the pain of their bad manners, they change. I use the story of the donkey and the 2x4. You got to get the donkey's attention. I'm not calling people donkeys. I'm just saying we've got to get the common person, as Heidi mentioned, I agree, who's made up their mind that they're not going to change. Trying to change them is a waste of time. But what can we change? Through our vote, through our actions, through demanding that our faith leaders stand up to what they preach, you know, and making a statement often is more important than words that we use. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it in terms of toleration and to answer your question.
Thank you. Anyone else care to comment?
I just wanted to say one thing, and I do think that if you're part of a minority group, you have as much responsibility to speak up, because we know that prejudices occur within minority groups. And just because my story is not the same as anybody else's story, right? And just because you have many different minorities, that doesn't mean that the minorities are cohesive in any way. So, I have as much responsibility to another minority. And I think that has become very evident after the current events. So, it's not just one group.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have just a few more things here to take a look at. Heidi, do you want to bring us through these? You're muted, by the way.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So our next webinar will actually be a Zoom meeting, because it will be much more interactive. We will be featuring Dr. Destiny Peary, who will be doing implicit bias training. And so here what we have in the last 2 webinars, we've had narrative. And now what Dr. Peary will help us do is now move to the mechanism by which these things are born, and so that we can manage them. This will be determined in August. I know Joe had sent me this. The Trickster Cultural Gallery has, starting today and through the weekend, each day at noon, a 4-day Unity Fire. Really amazing organization. If you've never been to the Trickster Gallery, I highly recommend that you see how the indigenous people have, what they mean to this community. I mean, we all know Chicago is from an indigenous word. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a poll here in a minute. So is there any more slides? No. Okay. Yes. So what can we do? You've got to vote. You've got to ask your leaders to hire more diverse educators and staff and first responders and civic employees. We've got to apply resources. That means money dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our league devoted over $1,000 to these webinars. That's 1/10 of our budget. You have to admit prejudice exists. You cannot tame it. if you refuse to name it. You have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. You're not going to grow and change if you're not willing to be uncomfortable. Anybody who's ever exercised a day in their life knows if you're going to make progress, you have to be uncomfortable. And then we want to reward you. So if you tag us on social media with your story of interrupting a microaggression, or email your story of interrupting a microaggression or a microaggression that's happened to you, let's start telling those stories. Tag us on social media or email us at action.lwvah@gmail.com. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a drawing for 2 tickets for the Illinois Commission on Diversity and Human Relations gala coming up, hopefully, fingers crossed, in October. It's a concert and dinner I'm super excited to be going to. And so I'm going to launch a quick poll to help us be a better ally to you. So if you could answer some of these questions, this will help us determine when we are going to have our next program. It will help us figure out how you're finding out about us. And it also help us know what you're planning to do to be a better ally. We really do appreciate everybody coming. We're still learning the technology. All of our resources can be found on our website at www.lwvah.org. And then go to the IllinoisVoterGuide.org for registration and election information. I highly recommend that you ask for your mail-in ballot now. Please do not wait until November to ask for that mail-in ballot. First of all, you can't wait till November. The deadline is in October. But we don't want to overwhelm our county clerks by waiting until the last minute for those mail-in ballots. And all indications are that social distancing might still be in order at the November election, and we want to make sure that we all vote. So please, please, please get your mail-in ballot now. Anyway, so I appreciate you participating in our ballot, or in our poll, to help us better serve you. And then I really do appreciate Candace coming here today to be our interpreter. One of the things that we are trying to be is more equitable, more inclusive. And we know that the disabled in our community are underserved, and we are trying to be better. League has a long history of asking people of color to stand in the back of the line. And our goal is to change that. And so we are trying to be better, and we're going to be better when we face our faults, admit them, and then hopefully move forward. So I really appreciate all of our panelists. Any last thing before I end the poll? We have almost everybody. Come on, everybody participate. Any last things?
Hey, Heidi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, that's Joe.
Joe!
Yes. Yes. So I had, so my apologies. I was about 15, 20 minutes late in starting. Just the ceremonies were going great here today. We had Reverend Michael Myers as a speaker tonight. So I missed by a few minutes and then had some technology issues. That's why I'm not in video mode. But so I was able to listen, and I was trying to figure out how to chime in on a phone while on my computer.
So why don't you share with us now? We still have a few minutes left of our webinar. What microaggressions have you been subjected to?
So there's a number of them from the Native community that I don't know if they're micro or larger scale, but it's kind of like everyone assumes that Native people were here first, and that's about as much as credit as we get. it's like, oh yeah, Native people were here first, but time started now because our community came here or this is happening. So those are kind of things that they forget that we've been here for how many generations before point of contact. So it's now looking at that for our future generations, for our kids and their kids, of how do they blend into this society that is now changing rapidly, to blend into a population that is not thinking Native. They think natives are Southwest. Illinois has the third largest off-reservation population in the country. Not many people think of Native people even being in Chicago or Illinois. So I guess that's, you know, in a short view, that's a way of looking at it. And you know, the tolerance discussion, so I heard that, and I appreciated Clyde's comments. I think that's right on target, of how you know, tolerance is not a positive word. It's always a tolerance of something. So I agree with those comments and feedback. There's no sense in repeating them because it was well said. But I think as we move forward, there's a lot of positive things happening here. You know, the Unity Fire that burns for 4 days now. It started this morning, and it'll burn 24/7 till Sunday night. And we have different cultures each night for people to come out and participate. So it's our way of trying to reach out to say, we want to be included too, and all of these things that are happening, and it's just not thought of having a Native voice. Thanks to Heidi, we are here, or I am here anyway, to share a little bit of our wanting to be included in this process. So I appreciate that very much, and I apologize for joining late.
Thank you, Joe.
So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to, you know, in the few minutes that we have, be happy to chime in now that I figured out to unmute my screen to make my phone work.
We're all figuring out the technology. Our interpreter wasn't on screen for a decent amount of time until I figured that out.
Heidi, I have a suggestion.
Yes.
It's called, it's a question. What are we looking for? I think if we started asking that question, if you look at me, doesn't matter whether you know me or not, what are you looking for when you look at me? You will always find what you're looking for. I'm looking at each of you. Whatever I'm looking for, I'm going to find it. If I'm looking for your weaknesses, I'm going to find it because we got it. If I'm looking for your strong points, I'm going to find it because you got it. If we just start that, what are you looking for? And get people to look, to have a balance. Look for the good. Look beyond color. Look beyond gender. Look at one's character. I think we ought to just fan that out and get people asking that question. What are we looking for? Because you got to find whatever you're looking for. I'm done. Thank you.
Anybody else have any last requests of our audience of what you hope that they will take from tonight's webinar with them? I will say, I can announce based on our poll that our next program, put it in your calendar, August 6th. August the 6th, we will be sending that information out. It will not, however, be free because this particular program is valuable and the facilitator is not inexpensive. So any last things about what we want our audience to take with us?
Let me add in the last comment to Mr. Brooks' comment there of what we're looking for. I think we should be ready to answer that question with what are we prepared to share about ourselves. So people are coming to look for something, but what are they going to find by our words back? So they're looking for a weakness, and if we express strength, that may confuse them. And that's okay, because that's part of the learning process of, your physical characteristics may say, oh, you're not a dominant person. But when you have a conversation with somebody and you are that dominant person, that's where this conflict or new strategies of, our Native community has been very humble and usually takes it, and we're teaching our children not to anymore. And that's part of that, what are you coming to look for, but what do they get when they look for that? So I think that response is really important, coming from especially the young ones, that they're expressing who they are, not just what people expect of them. I'll end on that one.
I think that, Joe, you're making an excellent point about our children, about what we, the thing I think I mentioned, I expect my kids to call me on being a jerk. And I think we have to be okay with that. We have to allow that. I was a bully. No kidding. I was a bully in high school. I was very mean. And when I hear adults and teachers talk about how they're going to deal with bullying, and they think that the adults can do something about it, I say my response when I was a kid, when somebody would say, I'm going to tell my parent on you, or I'm going to tell the teacher on you, my response was always, go ahead and tell on me, and then see how bad it really gets. We have to have, now, had another student intervened, I promise you that would have made a big difference. I look at Katie Page, and I have daughters the same age. There were hardly any bullies in that class, because there were a couple of people in that class who wouldn't tolerate it, who would step in. This idea of minding your own business, I don't know, I think we need to get past it, but that's maybe just IMHO.
Okay.
I've revealed an awful lot of bad things about myself today.
You're not a bad person.
Sustaining discomfort, Heidi. You're doing a great job.
So I would like to say to everybody who has tuned in today, first off, thank you very much. Right? The fact that you signed up and participated in this webinar is a sign that you want to do something, and it is very much appreciated as well. And so I would say that what I would like for everybody to take away from this is go out there and do it. Use your own voice, and it's not going to be perfect, right? Every conversation is not going to magically wind up with, oh, you know what, you are absolutely right. I am so sorry. I will never do it again, right? There will be pitfalls. There will be conversations that don't go as planned. There will be conversations that go better than expected as well. So what I would ask is just to keep trying and keep pushing, right? Because the only way this works is if we all continue to try to change our little corner of the universe and take it from there.
Progress, not perfection.
Yeah, and I think another thing is that you have to understand that you're also gonna have these thoughts, or because for example, for me it's every single time I am gonna refer to someone instead of saying maybe this person's Asian, I think about first saying, oh, this person is from China. And I'm like, wait, but I'm making an assumption. Why am I assuming that this person is from this country when I don't know that? So it is okay to do, it's not okay to do these things, but understand that as long as you catch yourself and you're like trying to make it better, it is okay. So you're gonna make mistakes, but as long as you're trying to make it better, then you're okay.